What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the seventh album by electronic music band Depeche Mode. Basically, this project is called Violator, and it came out in the late winter of 1990. Now, the thing about this particular album is this is kind of a seminal album here. This is pretty much a staple of like the 90s in music, I would have to say. It's definitely like a five-star album. It was seen as such by like places like allmusic.com and Blender and some of those type places. Rolling Stone gave this album like a 4.5 stars out of 5. So I would definitely have to say this is kind of an impactful album and definitely a pretty big staple and just overall trend setting one that had a lot of things. I kind of felt like it carried some of the 80s trends and tried to embrace them in the 90s. It was interesting just the 80s, just seeing the concepts of some of the stuff that happened that it was initially kind of there in like at least the early 90s or so. Things like Queen and Depeche Mode and some of those type things were kind of carrying on into this particular decade. But I would have to say I do definitely like this album. It's pretty. I do like the impact of it. And I would have to say I liked all the singles on this album. This is definitely a pretty huge album, I would say. This is a pretty impactful album, and I definitely like the emphasis and the overall execution of this particular album. I just feel like the vocals are just very crisp and executed extremely well on here. It's just very emphatic, and it's just kind of like I would have to say that Depeche Mode was kind of in full swing by this point in the 90s. I would have to say they had been around since the early 80s, and I am going to get to some more of those albums and kind of see what those are about. But yeah, I basically knew this album from Personal Jesus. I remember that song off the Grand Theft Auto. I knew about this band from Personal Jesus. I remember that song from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas back in the day for the PlayStation and that type of stuff. I just would have to say it's a pretty interesting type time to kind of get some of this. But I would have to say there are some other enjoyable songs on here, and this definitely has like there are some other enjoyable songs on here, and this definitely has a pretty emphatic time, and it really embraces like electronica music and synth pop really well. And it says on Wikipedia that this is also gothic rock, and I can really see that because these just has like some droning vocals on here that are just very like I don't want to say monotone, but they're just very dreary and just overall kind of like looming. I would have to say I just really like the ghostly kind of emphasis. I definitely like the ghostly emphasis of this project, and I would definitely have to say that there's a number of songs that could just kind of have that kind of ghoulishness about it that just works extremely well. So it's definitely pretty emphatic to kind of get that. And then I would have to say on top of that that Marilyn Manson and Nine Inch Nails, two folks that were huge in like the 90s, drew influence from Depeche Mode. So that's pretty big just to kind of see them as being like a huge staple of like the 80s. And I wanted to see how that carried into the 90s and stuff. And this is definitely a pretty emphatic album just to have it kick off. I mean, it's not always like, especially in like later times once you start getting past like about 94, 95, 97 or so, most critics that are kind of more publicized and journalist bound, they kind of stop giving albums like 5 stars and that type of stuff. So I definitely wanted to see some of these just to kind of see the context of it. Although I do feel like this is a pretty heavy hitting album. It's not going to get a 10 out of 10 for me, but I do definitely appreciate the emphasis of it, and I do see the quality quite a bit. This is definitely an important album, and just overall did a lot of damage. Just have to say it's just a vastly good album and just has a lot of things going for that works. It's just, all the singles really kick ass. There's just a bunch of things on here that really have some powerful emphasis. I can see this as just being like a very seminal album of the 90s. So we'll go ahead and talk about the singles. There were 4 of them. Before I get to the singles, I'm going to say that there is like a 2006 version of this album that has some bonus tracks on there that would raise the album count to 16. There's only 9 songs. There's only 9 songs on the 1990 version of the album, which is the version of the album I'm reviewing. So I'll review like the 2006 version down the road. I would have to say I'm going to review this one. So the first single is Personal Jesus. The first single is Personal Jesus, and this is a haunting, looming synth rock tune. I would have to say it has a bunch of ghastly charm about it, and it's pretty stellar. So this is just one that has a lot of powerful emphasis about it. It's just a vastly kind of emphatic song from like the early 90s. Just would have to say this has a lot of good affability about it and just works extremely well. Definitely like the ghoulish kind of vocals on here. This is just one that kind of has like a very haunting feel about it that this is pulled off quite well. I just have to say this really did a lot of things right. This is a great lead single to kind of have. It's really overall like that just kind of like, I mean, this one just has like such a gothic type appeal about it. It's just interesting to kind of get this, just the emphasis. There just weren't songs like this back in like the early 90s as far as that kind of went. This is before Nine Inch Nails for the most part and Marilyn Manson and that type of stuff. I just feel like this is just an extreme kind of emphatic kind of one that just worked quite well and just did it. I just think that this was just a good concept to kind of get here. Definitely like this one. Very hooky, very melodic. Definitely like the melodies on this song. Definitely like the hook on here. Just an overall good emphatic song that just works. The second single is Enjoy the Silence. The second single is Enjoy the Silence. This is a ghoulish dance rock tune, I would have to say. It's got emphatic vibes with like a catchy high mid-tempo pace. So this is definitely kind of one. This one's a little bit more bouncy and dance ready than Personal Jesus, but I would say they're both like an excellent 1-2 punch to kind of have on here. Both of these are pretty emphatic and just overall haunting songs. I really like the kind of this sprawling kind of bemoaning type feel of both these songs. It just really has like a very groanish kind of just banshee like feel. This in like it may not be screeching like a banshee, but it definitely has like a ghostly type appeal about it. It may not be screeching like a banshee, but it just has like a ghostly type appeal about it that just works extremely well. And I just would have to say both of these, Personal Jesus and Enjoy the, I'd have to say Personal Jesus and Enjoy the Silence just work quite well in terms of the emphasis that they kind of give off. These are just some great dance rock kind of tunes, and just have like these are some dance club songs for rock music. So it's interesting kind of get this because most of the time rock music wasn't really dropping like dance tunes and that type of stuff. But I feel like Personal Jesus is more like the lead single, just kind of a ride out song and just kind of an emphasized one that's just all over the place. Just really one to get you thrilled and that type of stuff. It's a very energized one. This one's just kind of more on the dance floor. There's some singles on here, like I feel like Enjoy the Silence and World in My Eyes are the two dance singles, but I would have to say that Enjoy the Silence really has like a kind of just, I would say, yeah, Enjoy the Silence just has like a really ghastly kind of just high mid tempo kind of dance pace about it. It's just a pretty emphatic one to kind of have on the dance floor. This would be a really nice one to kind of hear, especially nowadays. This works extremely well. And the third single is Policy of Truth. And this one's kind of more of like a hop and bop one. Definitely like this one. This one just feels like something you'd listen to walking up the street, something like that. Just something out of like a 90s, 80s commercial, something like that. This is a very spring-like hop and bop type feel about it. I would have to say in spring, I mean like April, May, June type stuff. This real balmy weather outside. I would say it's like a local traverse tune. Definitely just feels like something just walk in to get like some sodas and things like that. Just beers, those sorts of things. It's very peppy. Just has an 80s feel about it. Definitely, this just reminds me of something ripped out of 1985. Just something you'd see on like a VHS tape, just some 80s advertisement, something like that. And it just feels like a solid mini dance cut. This one's kind of a dance cut, not quite as emphatic as Enjoy the Silence, but it kind of has like some decent kind of more peppy kind of dance feel about it. This is kind of the one that would probably be the more commercial. And in terms of like Spotify plays, this is the song that has the most popular spins on it. This one got almost to 100 million plays on here. So this is kind of one that has a lot of emphasis. But I personally Enjoyed the Silence and Personal Jesus more. But I would have to say that Policy of Truth is a good one. This is definitely a peppy kind of one. This would be the more commercial one to kind of be like the blue collar kind of makeshift one for just breadwinning and just selling the album, that type of stuff. But all the singles sold the album, I'd have to say. And then the fourth single is World in My Eyes, and this one has like an 80s dance club feel about it. It's a nice cut for a night out and it has appealing bounce about it. So I would say this is like the one where the hero character in a movie kind of meets up with some friends, that type of stuff. This really has like a nice hangout type feel about it. Just really kind of laid back a bit. It's kind of like a decent mid-tempo type dance bop about it. This would be like a late night kind of appeal, but it's also like a pretty solid hangout song, I would have to say. It just kind of works in like a more social and kind of affable type tune. This could almost be like a part of like a Miami Vice soundtrack, something like that. I can just definitely feel like the 80s kind of dance club appeal about this one. This really feels like stuff ripped out of 1986 or 87, which is pretty dope just to kind of get some of this way out in the 90s. It's interesting to kind of have that. This is another one that just kind of has a lot of strong emphasis and just works pretty well. So I definitely like some of these tunes as far as that kind of goes. This is another nice highlight on here. I feel like World in My Eyes and Enjoy the Silence are two good highlights for like some dance clubs and just overall appeal. Like World in My Eyes is not quite as ghoulish. I feel like World in My Eyes is a little bit more contemporary, just a little bit more. I'd say World in My Eyes is a little bit more contemporary, just a little bit more spirited and has a little bit more like not quite as zoned out, I would have to say, but I definitely like the emphasis of some of these. But yeah, all four of the singles are really just admirable. I just have to say all four of these just really work extremely well. And they just have some strong emphasis as far as that kind of goes. Just some really good highlights and just overall I can see the emphasis of this particular album being as catchy because for the most part, albums back in the day didn't always have the emphasis of getting to like the fourth single and just being able to have like all of them just really rock hard and that type of stuff as far as just having like a strong kind of execution and just availability. I can see kind of the emphasis of the singles because not all albums back in the day would get to the fourth single and kind of have that powerful emphasis as far as being able to stretch out and just crest and chart with all these songs. That's pretty good to be able to get that. But Talk about the rest of this album. So talk about the songs I recommend on this album. There's 9 songs on this album I'm reviewing, and out of those 9 songs, I wound up recommending 6.5. So that's pretty good. 6 songs plus an almost song. So I'll go ahead and recommend those 6.5. So they would be Personal Jesus, Enjoy the Silence, Halo, Policy of Truth, World in My Eyes, Blue Dress, and the almost song is Waiting for the Night. So talk about the almost song first, Waiting for the Night. So talk about the almost song on this album, Waiting for the Night. This is a decent wintry type tune. It's subdued and chilly, and it has lots of plush ambience about it. This is definitely one that I would listen to in the winter when it's like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning as the snow is starting to touch down and it's just white out everywhere outside. I would have to say it's just a good, nice one for that. This really kind of has like an emphasized feel. This is very ambient. I really like the ambience of this particular song. It's really not like a dance club or nightclub kind of song. It's really not really like a makeshift or kind of out and about kind of song either. This really reminds me of something that this is more subdued and just kind of around the house and just like a more localized sense and just kind of this maybe minor menial tasks, something like that. I would almost say house cleaning music, but it just really has like a kind of I do feel like there's like a minor degree of social affability about it, but just not in very high grade. I just would have to say it's probably just something like if it's snowing outside and you're just going to pick up like some beers or something like that, or like some donuts, something of like a minor sense that you could just walk or drive to real quick and get just like in a minor sense to kind of just appreciate the sights. It just really reminds me of like an easy kind of just appreciating the sights and just kind of being ambient and just kind of taking in this kind of just more insular and just kind of away and just kind of more appreciative. It's just interesting to kind of get that one. It's very much one of the more obscure songs on this album. It's just kind of the emphasis of this one is kind of has like a different kind of vibe where it's just I wasn't expecting Depeche Mode to have a song like this, but I do like the concept of getting some of these. Even in a 9 song album, this is a good even in like a 9 song album, this is a pretty good cut to have. It shows off their songwriting and overall versatility. So this is a good concept to kind of have. Blue Dress is a romantic track, but it just has such a haunting and emphatic feel about it that this was something I wasn't expecting from Depeche Mode as far as that kind of went. I mean, it's kind of house cleaning music, but it has like a romantic type feel about it. And it's just overall one that this is kind of unexpected from them as far as getting like some of this gothic rock, just in a more house cleaning and around the house type sense, just in kind of a more lackadaisical and this more plainer sense. I just would say it's just very mundane. It just kind of has that emphasis about it. It's just an interesting one to kind of get. But I definitely like this gothic rock from Depeche Mode as far as songs like Enjoy the Silence, Personal Jesus, and Blue Dress. Those are definitely some ghostly kind of ones on here. Just an extra kind of niche for them to kind of get that this works extremely well. I just wonder if other albums by them have this kind of approach. I would have to say it's just an interesting one. And then I would have to say about Halo, this is another highlight on here. This is a very 80s pop sounding electro dance hit. I would have Halo is another one that's very similar to World in My Eyes and Enjoy the Silence. I definitely like the approach of some of these 80s kind of dance club sounding type bops on here. These just work extremely well, and I definitely like the approach behind these. The production on this album is very excellent, even despite the fact that it feels like it's ripped out of the 80s. I would have to say I really like the overall execution and emphasis that these songs kind of have. This is very sprawled out and this really works quite well, and I just would have to say it's very sprawled out and it just really works quite well, and this overall has like some polish that this is very highlighted and this has a lot of good things going for it. There's just a lot of songs on here that just work extremely well, and this is just an overall highlighted album, and I can see the quality behind it as far as saying that this is like a 5-star album as far as that kind of goes. Definitely like the execution. Even if it's not going to get a 10 out of 10 from me, I still feel like it has the quality abound on this particular project. So there's plenty of songs. Songs like Enjoy the Silence, Halo, and World in My Eyes all have like a kind of 80s dance club type feel about it that just really, I feel like Enjoy the Silence, Halo, and World in My Eyes all have like an 80s dance feel about it that just really feels ripped out of like a Miami Vice episode or something like that. Just something out of an 80s movie soundtrack, something of that sort, man, especially like in an electronic sense. And I would have to say songs like Policy of Truth and Blue Dress or some kind of more homebound ones and just kind of makeshift kind of ones that just work quite well. And that those are some other emphasized ones that just have a lot of execution. And then I would have to say that songs like Personal Jesus and I would say Waiting for the Night is just kind of a good wintry kind of one to kind of have in a more subdued kind of format, just more homely bound and more like a night sense. And I would have to say Personal Jesus is just a really ghostly kind of one that just works quite well. That's a good pairing with Enjoy the Silence. So that's just kind of some good concepts on here. There's some good executions on here, I would have to say. So talk about some of the songs I didn't enjoy on here, which is really just 2 songs, which is just Sweetest Perfection and then Clean. And both those songs, like Clean, I didn't really like that much just because that one was kind of like a power ballad type one. think that one was kind of dealing with sobriety and that type of stuff. But just I didn't really like the kind of composition of that particular song. I didn't really like the composition of that particular song. It was just trying to be like a power ballad that just didn't pull it off quite as well. I just kind of felt like, I mean, I would have liked to have seen some better power ballads from Depeche Mode, but that one just didn't quite work as well for me. That one didn't quite factor in for me. I didn't quite vibe with that one as much. And then I would have to say that Sweetest Perfection just didn't have a beat that I really enjoyed. That one was trying to be like another 80s dance club bop, kind of similar to Halo and World in My Eyes and Enjoy the Silence, but that one was just probably the crummiest beat on this album. This one probably had like the worst production on here. It's not to say it's a horrible, absolutely horrible production, but this was one that I just didn't quite mesh with quite entirely. This one that didn't stack up for me. I just didn't see the execution of Winter where I'd listen to it. So that's just kind of the concept of how that one kind of went. That's really the only dud beat on here I would have to say is Sweetest Perfection for the most part. Maybe Clean didn't quite have as good enough one either, but I'd say so me basically liking 6.5 songs. So me basically liking 6.5 songs out of 9 on this project. I'm gonna go ahead and give this album like an 8.5 out of 10. I feel like that's pretty damn good to kind of get. This is definitely a seminal album out of the 90s and just had a lot of overall strong execution, did a lot of things right. Very much had like the class and the grace of something that just felt very powerful throughout like the 90s and was probably a staple of the 80s as far as that kind of went. They were on their 7th album by this point. I would have to say is the overall emphasis is quite strong on here. There's a number of good singles, and they just kind of felt like they were in their prime. I feel like these are just polished songs that just have a lot of, like, these don't feel like kind of just trivial kind of songs. They're just kind of this like menial and that type of stuff. I feel like songs like Personal Jesus, Enjoy the Silence. I feel like all the singles, Personal Jesus, Enjoy the Silence, Policy of Truth, and World in My Eyes had like a strong emphasis that just seemed like they lasted longer. And this is just something that was really like staples of the 90s and just really carried some of that 80s energy and just had them stick around for longer. Kind of similar to REM, kind of similar to Queen in like a minor sense as far as that kind of went. Just those type folks. Nine Inch Nails kind of did that sort of thing. White Zombie, some of those type folks. This White Zombie, some of those type folks. But I just would have to say I do like I really connected with like the ghoulish kind of just droning vocals that this kind of felt banshee like as far as that kind of went. It definitely just had like a particular kind of just ghostly kind of feel that just really had some strong executions. It's really surprising, especially like the first two singles, Personal Jesus and Enjoy the Silence. Especially like the first two singles, Personal Jesus and Enjoy the Silence. Those are both just very ghostly kind of ones that just had like a very strong emphasis. So I just would have to say there's some good stuff there. In terms of the social score, I'm going to go ahead and give this album, like, that's kind of tough as far as what I'm going to score the social part of this album. I would kind of say that there's a number of bops on here. I feel like all the singles are pretty social. There's some extra songs on here like Halo, and I feel like a romantic song in Blue Dress, I would have to say. So I would say about 6 songs kind of have some social affability about it, but I kind of look after just being able to say that some of these other ones are just a little bit cumbersome. I'm going to go ahead and give the social appeal of this album like an 8.75. I just can't really, I'm kind of on the fence. It's kind of dicey to kind of figure out what the social score would kind of be because I feel like there's some strong emphasis of some of these. Personal Jesus is just like a really kind of emphatic kind of lead single and just energetic highlight. I feel like Enjoy the Silence and World in My Eyes are some good kind of snaring dance tunes, and Policy of Truth is kind of like a hop and bop kind of local traverse kind of cut, just real peppy. Halo is kind of another dance cut. So there are some ones on here, but I kind of feel like in terms of like, yeah, I would just have to say it's just very good. I just feel like there's some songs on here like maybe like 3 or so songs like Waiting for the Night and then Sweetest Perfection and then Clean are kind of some ones that just have a different kind of approach. They're just not quite as social, but it's definitely pretty emphatic. I would have to say me giving the social score a higher score than I gave the normal score is pretty good, just to say there's a lot of good affable tunes on here, but just in terms of like, yeah, I would probably say that probably like the dance club moments are like the most affable in terms of like some of that, but I just kind of look after it. I just question like the contemporary type feel of it when you play it around folks. I mean, obviously this is about 33, 34 years old now, so I just would have to say the concept about it as to how well it would connect. I feel like Personal Jesus is a good one. Enjoy the Silence and Policy. Or I feel like Enjoy the Silence and World in My Eyes are some good ones to kind of connect with folks. But I feel like some of these songs are just kind of more retro and it just makes me wonder the edge of like the contemporary as far as that kind of goes with today's sound. But it is good stuff. I still recommend it definitely. But this is kind of, some folks might think it's retro and kind of over the hill, but I definitely don't. So in terms of the future, like Depeche Mode, I don't really know what they've been up to. I know since they've been around since like the early 80s, I don't think that they're dropping albums like that, like often oftenly, I would have to say, but they do have quite a few albums. So I'm definitely going to get to some more of these and see about them. I do want to review some of their stuff from the 80s, and I will try to get to some of their 90s stuff and some more things just to see what they've kind of done. But this is definitely a pretty stellar project.